Welcome to the wonderful panel members, and thank you students and parents and counselors and educators who you've been so kind to sticking in from 9:30 a.m. this morning. And I know this is also kind of a telecast for you as well as an opportunity. I'm going to move into our next panel for the day, which is Every Decision Counts and Careers in Economics. And we're going to delve a little bit about the subject, what it means in the current context, where is it going, what is the kind of career opportunities and all of that. We have a fabulous and a very diverse panel with us here today, with a mix of career people, our professors, as well as people from the industry and the school network. I'll take a minute or two to just introduce them quickly. Dr. Sarabjit Natesan, she is an associate professor of economics at CREA, and she received a PhD in management from IIT Madras. She did an MS in industrial management from New Jersey, from the Institute of Technology at Rutgers, and the MBE and her MBE from Delhi University. So thanks, Sarabjit. Thanks for joining us. From the schools, we have Kavita Mathur. She's an experienced academic head, and she's demonstrated history of working in education management industry. And as an education professional herself, she graduated from RDVV University. We are joined here by Pritika Hingorani. Pritika is the Director and Research Fellow at IDFC Institute, and she leads the Institute's urban programs. She has a master's in city planning from MIT and a dual bachelor's degree from Bryn Mawr College. David Appaswamy, who is from Social Beat. He heads the brand and strategy at Social Beat, one of India's youngest but fastest growing digital marketing companies. David has over 35 years of experience across business strategy, marketing management, advertising, sales, digital marketing, and the social sectors. Gaurav Ghosh, do we have Dr. Gaurav joined us as well? Fabulous. Thank you. Yeah. I did see it initially. Dr. Gaurav Ghosh, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Gaurav is an economist with research, policy development, and private sector consulting experience. He has a PhD from Pennsylvania State University and an MA from Jawaharlal Nehru University and a BA from St. Xavier's College. Thank you so much, wonderful people, for joining us. Bhakti hasn't set this light, right? She said this is the most subscribed to panel, and I know that people don't sign in, they're watching from all sorts of corners, because economics continues to dominate to be the most popular program, not just at CREA, but more largely even at the school level. So we will try, it's an attempt over the next hour and a half through the discussion and the Q&A to talk through a bit about economics, and not so much, it's not going to be an academic deep dive. It's going to be more about understanding the discipline, its applications, and all of that. So I'm going to start really this first round and kind of looking at a then and now scenario. And what I want to throw this question about is asking is, how have you seen the discipline of economics itself, the study of economics, evolve, and what are some significant changes you've seen in the decade or so? Pritika, if we could start with you.
Sure, of course. Kala, thank you so much for asking me to join this. I think I told you this, but it's always a pleasure to do these, because I think we've all been faced with these questions and decisions along the way. So it's wonderful to have these forums. So I think, to me, the most interesting thing, so I studied economics in school, then went on to study it in college, and then worked in economic consulting for 3 years, which is essentially a practical application of economics. To me, I think the most encouraging shift that I've seen over the years has been this willingness to accept the complexity of the world in economics, right? So I think all of us who studied economics remember looking at that list of assumptions early on, right? So in that first month you get, before you start looking at models, here's a list of assumptions. And I now like to think of them as, the terms and conditions, or the fine print that you're like, okay, fine, here's the fine print, and then move on. But I think it strikes everyone at that point that these terms and conditions, these assumptions don't always hold in the real world. And there have always been economists who challenged these assumptions, that argued for the integration of other perspectives, whether it's psychology, whether it's just understanding that human beings aren't always rational. There's some fantastic work that's been done on how you make decisions under stress. And so to me, I think the most encouraging shift that I've seen is seeing economics integrate with other disciplines in a way that makes it more multidimensional. So that's, to me, the most interesting shift.
Gaurav, could we get your thoughts on the subject?
Yes, sure. And like Pritika said, thank you for inviting me. And as always, I'm an economist, so if people want to hear me talk about economics and the potential of economics, I'm very happy to do so. And so thanks for getting me on board here. And I agree with what Pritika said, and which is that that this has been a change in the field where we've understood that economic models can be very elegant, can be very can lead to very rigorous predictions. But that's always been the conflict between the economic model and real world outcomes. And now as Pritika was noting, I mean there has been an embracing of this fact, and there has been an attempt to try to understand where the deviations lie, and that has led to a fertile extension of the theory itself. So now we are seeing a lot more complex modeling on the theoretical side, and we've also seen tremendous improvements, tremendous leaps as far as the empirical analysis also goes. So our statistical, our econometric toolkit today is a lot more varied than it was 10 years ago. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is just the sheer computational power that we have today, which we did not have a few years ago, right? So that just allows us to implement models, for example, non-linear estimation models that might not have been feasible a few years ago. We can now use them a lot more. And secondly, there is a lot more awareness of the power of numbers nowadays, right? And this is also where parallel trends like big data and so on come in, where people are now very accepting of the fact that there is so much data out there. And if we can work with that kind of data, then there's so much more that we can do. And so, economics has also taken this to heart. And so there's a lot more work on working with, data sets that perhaps did not exist before, and, using this information to establish causality, right? Because that's also a lot of what economic analysis is. So practically, what has this led to? The field as a whole, I would say, has moved a lot from, being, perhaps a bit more theoretical to being a lot more quantitative and a lot more applied. Right. And so we're even seeing instances where, hitherto fairly theoretical fields like game theory or auction theory are now being very widely used in applied real world settings. Right. So auctions, you might be aware that, for example, now they are used to auction of natural resources by governments, spectrum by governments. Right. So if you heard about spectrum auctions in India, that is an application of auction theory, which is actually a fairly abstruse branch of economics. And similarly, game theory, we've all heard of that. There are applications there as well. There's been work on, matching organ donation using game theory, things like that. I could go on, but, we have a lot more to talk about, so I'll cut it there.
Great. Sarabjit, if I could get your thoughts on that as well, just.
Thank you, Kala, and thank you, everybody else. And perhaps I would just have to say, yes, same to what Priyanka said and same to what Gaurav said, but it is actually it's like I find it's been a decadal change almost. Every decade, the study of economics and its its implications, they kind of undergo a change. I mean, not a paradigm shift, but there is a very visible shift. So carrying on to what Gaurav said, from qualitative economics, which is theoretical, and looking at historicity of economics and the way classical economists thought in what was happening in the Soviet Union, and other communist and command countries and capitalistic countries. Now we're looking at quantitative analysis. We're looking at, to further what the other panelists said, we're looking at data, not just in the various fields that Gaurav pointed out, but in addition to that, we're looking at it in the credit markets, in the investment markets, we're looking at it in welfare. Data-driven welfare and data-driven application of policies has actually revolutionized the way things are done. For example, we have RCTs and we have various models now which are enabling more efficient decision making. And so I feel that, yes, there has been a paradigm shift, but it basically then comes back to the fact that, as you said earlier, that economics has been perhaps the most job ready study in school and in universities. And for example, at one point in time, I remember my students wanted to, and I've mentioned this to Bhakti also yesterday, everybody wanted to become an investment banker. Right now, if I talk to my students, they all want to do policy. And it's a paradigm shift in that sense that they understand the market and the trends, because everything is now so easily available to everybody, in terms of the data, in terms of information that is moving. So yeah, and I mean, I could add, but as Gaurav said, there's a lot more to discuss, and there are many more people who will add their thoughts to it. So
Interesting. Yeah, we did kind of hear this come quite unanimously across this whole stress on numbers. So clearly there is an interface with mathematics, there's an interface with policy, there's an interface to some extent with the computing space. Kavita, I want to kind of come to you on this question, and this really is where we're navigating a little bit to understand how economics is really interfacing. And I'm going to start with the most common denominator. Do you really think that students, and I don't know, at school level or otherwise, have a very decent understanding of the potential that the subject actually holds, and where you see the economics graduates actually contributing more towards?
Can you hear me? First, let me ask the standard, because I have a little shaky network. Kala, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so sorry I asked. That was my first question, and because my network is a little unstable, so I was just trying to figure it out. So thank you so much, Kala. It's a pleasure being here on this particular platform. Coming to a very simple question, I'm actually going to talk in very, very simple terms, because, at the school level, children, when they come from 10th into 11th, they are studying economics at grade 9 and grade 10 level, but they do not have any clear understanding. A lot of the understanding comes to them from their elders, like maybe a very educated parent or a parent who's from that industry will probably be able to guide the child better, or maybe the influence of teachers. But when they do come into 11th, I will just share this with you. And this has not changed over the years. In fact, it has become every child's one main agenda towards career path is how quickly can I acquire wealth? Okay. And I always feel that, yes, that's an important thing. Acquiring wealth, they need to have a career for that. But more important than just acquiring wealth is managing wealth. And a lot of focus is going on to that. And that's where the study of economics really comes into play. I think as in school, economics is, it's like a subject which is not really with any stream, and it's with every stream. Okay, like in commerce, you ask class 11, 12 students, they're always studying accounts. Their focus is always accounts. Economics is also there. Children from the science stream opt for economics as a sixth subject. There is a percentage of children who are focused, who know what they're doing. But again, like I said, that percentage is very, very small. In humanities, children do opt for economics because it is one of the important key, core subjects. So I'm not very sure whether the information regarding the importance of economics in their lives has yet been, has yet reached to the lowest level of class 10th, 11th, 12th, to the most common factor. But I think things have changed a lot in the past few years. CBSE is making such extensive efforts. So there is a very drastic shift in children's understanding. And of course, children are very, very tech savvy these days. As all of you were talking about numbers, they have more understanding of how the economics of everything works. They may not understand the theory part of it, but they definitely understand. The digital world has really made them very, very intelligent, economically wise, I would say.
And what a perfect segue to take that to David, that you just mentioned the whole digital space, and it's so true. So David, the whole digital marketing industry, right? It pretty much thrives on the promise. And today we know for traditional media, people who move from print and TV, where digital actually makes a difference is the fact that you know where your penny is going and you can make your penny count. So in that sense, do you see that beyond this whole creative element of it, there needs to be a very strong sense of economics, if you like, and it's almost like understanding the economics of the mind, and you see that coming together in the digital marketing industry?
Yeah, I've been listening very carefully to what everybody's been saying, and it's been absolutely fascinating. As you all know, I'm not an economist, I'm a marketer and a business strategist. And so I will look at it through that prism. And I might offer some perspectives, even in terms of economics. What I've been observing as a business strategist is the interplay of economic systems in the world and what the outcomes have been. First we saw liberalization and the intermeshing of economies all over the world, multilateralism and all of that. But the focus was entirely on growth and profits and not perhaps on equitable development. So in multiple economies around the world, the inequalities rose to such an extent. We have the outcome in terms of what we saw with the Trump. We have the outcome in our own country. We have what's happening in the Philippines, what's happening in the UK, because the economic system did not have a social aspect to it. And that impacts businesses. That impacts marketing and what brands can do. So this has been something that is a fascinating thing to see unfolding in front of us. And now we may see the beginning of a realization that liberalization with a social responsibility actually works better. I mean, there has to be a balance somewhere. So that is one aspect of it. The other is weaving in this aspect of global warming and the ecology and all of that. I don't know how many of you have read The Economics of Permanence by J.C. Kumarappa, who was Gandhi's economist. And he was perhaps a pioneer in sustainable economics. The Economy of Permanence is the book. And Schumacher, based his Small is Beautiful and all based on Kumarappa. Kumarappa, incidentally, is my grand uncle, which is why I happen to know all these things. So if you look at this social impact of economics, economic systems, and the environmental impact of economic systems and what they will the impact they will have on countries and filtering down to citizens, the rate of growth, the spread of wealth, all of that, it has a deep impact in terms of what we're going to see in terms of marketing and business strategies, coming down to digital marketing, because digital marketing is a subset of marketing, right? And we can see how it is affecting the psyche of citizens. If you look at, say, from 2019 onwards, when we saw the economy sliding deeply, and then we had the impact of the pandemic, consumers went into a kind of a siege mentality, and we're re-entering it now. With the lockdown announced in Tamil Nadu and all that, we're re-entering a siege mentality where people are sitting at home, dealing with fear, dealing with uncertainty, and not knowing what's going to happen. Millions have lost their jobs. Millions are dealing with dribbles of income. They are, we talk about upwardly mobile and all that. There are many, many, many families that are today downwardly mobile. And there are families stashing away what they can just in case somebody gets affected. How will we pay? There are families who've been wiped out by not just the pandemic and the ability to earn, but by medical fees. So all of these are going to have a huge impact in terms of what the markets will see as acceptable in terms of the styles of marketing and so on. We are seeing people moving into a frugal mindset. They are being very, very careful about what they do. So they will do with a minimum. They might occasionally indulge in a treat, but the kind of treat they would now indulge in is very different from what they did earlier. Then you have what's called the postponables. I won't buy a house now. I won't buy a car now. I won't buy a larger fridge now. I won't buy, they're putting those aside. And we saw that throughout last year. And towards the end of last year, people started buying again when things were getting better. And now you see, it's all crashing once more. So I think we're going to see a fundamental effect on people's psyches with the way the economy moves, with the other stresses impacting it. So, I mean, that's my take on it.
Yeah. Am I on? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Sorry. I just lost a brief moment there. So, Professor Gaurav, I'm going to, yeah, it's quite interesting what David just mentioned there. And it's kind of, extrapolating what's happening. At one level, he started this whole nation and what's happening across in a very larger scale to then coming down to people's behaviors and that bit. So you kind of suddenly see economics kind of go from there to as minute as that. So do you want to talk a little bit about your space, which is the behavior economics, and where do you see that practice grow and stand?
Right, great, Kala. Thanks for the question. So I guess I guess you're raising this question about behavioral economics because it's one of those topics within economics that has been getting a lot of interest in the popular press nowadays, right? Everyone has, I guess, a little bit of an idea perhaps of what behavioral economics is, at least anecdotally. They might have read a book or two by well-known behavioralists. They might be aware that a couple of behavioral economists over the last 10 years have won Nobel Prizes for economics for their work. But perhaps they might be still a little bit unsure about what exactly behavioral econ is and how is it different from economics as we understand it, or the more broad-based, the more mainstream ideas of what economics is. So I guess to answer your question, I should first talk a little bit about what the difference is between behavioral econ as I see it and your more standard neoclassical approaches to economics. And the basic difference it arises from the fact that in standard economic theories, we assume that all decision makers are rational. And by assuming that all decision makers are rational, in an economic context, it means something very specific. To put it, in a sentence, rationality in an economic context means that we're all human computers, right? End of story. It means that we can assimilate vast amounts of information, right? And we can process vast amounts of information very, very quickly. And then we can come up with decisions, and they will always be the right decisions because we have optimized over all the information that we have, all the constraints that we have. And we do this all the time for every single decision that we make in our life, whether it's, buying a car, or whether it's buying, a brand of, soft drink, or whether it's how we cross the road. We're optimizing like a human computer. We are calculating all the angles, all the decisions, and then making our decisions. So this is what an economist has in mind, at least, if you're thinking about the rational decision maker. And this is it's a nice concept, and it makes us look very good, right? We have incredible computational powers and so on. The unfortunate point is that this is not true, right? I mean, we actually don't make decisions like this, right? We don't have the capacity to, devote vast amounts of intellectual resources to decide whether I want to buy chocolate ice cream or I want to buy vanilla ice cream, right? I mean, it's not worth the effort to put in all that computational power to make such small decisions, right? And so this is where behavioral economics comes in, because it recognizes the fact that we are not human computers, that we have what is referred to as bounded rationality, which means that we have limited computing resources. We have limited ability to understand our environment around us. We have limited decision-making capabilities. And therefore, because of that, the decisions that we're going to make in many instances will be affected by various biases, right? Will be affected. There will be errors in the way we make our decisions. And also when we make our decisions, we often just go by simple rules of thumb, right? So again, coming to our ice cream example, if I'm choosing, chocolate versus vanilla, my rule of thumb might simply be, I don't want to eat the same flavor that I ate before. And I know that yesterday I had vanilla. So my rule of thumb is today I'm going to eat chocolate. End of story, right? So I'm not going through this massive computational process, which, the classical model says I should be going through. Instead, I have these very simple things. So that basically is behavioral economics and where it comes from. And what we're finding is that it has tremendous applications in all areas where humans make economic decisions, right? So, David is an expert in digital marketing. So marketing is, for example, an area where there is a lot of interplay of behavioral economics. So a lot of applied work in behavioral economics actually ends up being in the marketing domain, right? Or, for example, if we are trying to find out why is it that certain types of pricing strategies are more effective than other types of pricing strategies, behavioral economics can provide solutions for that. Beyond that, it can give us insights on what are the other types of pricing strategies maybe we want to, we should be perhaps pursuing, right? When it comes to advertising, online advertising, for example, what's very important is the ad that we see should make some sort of impression on us, right? And whether it's going to make an impression or not depends on the content of the ad itself. It depends on the type of person who's being exposed to the ad. So here again, behavioral economics can have insights on that kind of stuff, right? So therefore, I guess that's also why behavioral economics becomes interesting, because it deals with very real people, it deals with very real decisions, and it has very real insights that are applicable in a lot of different areas, right? So that's one area. We also see spillovers of behavioral economics into, for example, human resource management. Right? Supposing an HR function in a firm, something that might be very important is retention, right? You want, because it takes a lot of time and effort for a firm to hire someone. So they want to make sure they found the right person, and they want to make sure that once they found the right person, they can keep the right person, right? And so for this, you need to understand what are the drivers for that person, what is important to them, right? And then, once you have an idea of all that, then you need to kind of figure out what are the optimal kinds of compensation packages that you can design, right? Because from a firm's perspective, a compensation package is not only the money that goes into your wallet, but also, various other services that the firm might provide, right? They might provide some sort of healthcare. They might provide some sort of insurance services. If you're relocating, they might provide relocation services. If you go to an office, they might provide a canteen to eat. They might provide, gym access, things like that, right? Lots of firms have different permutations and combinations of the kinds of services. And behavioral economic methods and related econometric methods to help you understand the data can help you kind of narrow down that, for this kind of employee, perhaps at this level of this gender, of this age, these are the things that matter to them. So maybe if I'm going to be, offering them a compensation package, it needs to have certain elements, whereas someone else at a different stage of life, maybe there are other things that are more important, right? So there's so much that goes on out there, right? And obviously there are lots of ways that you can crunch the numbers. You don't need to be a behavioral economist to do all this, right? But there are insights that you get with this kind of training that might help you, right? To come up to identify these kinds of things, because you already have a very strong theoretical basis, like a framework, if you think about it that way, within which you can make these kinds of decisions, right? And then obviously, again, behavioral economics, why is it important? There are lots of applications in the areas of public policy, right? And there are lots of very well-known studies that demonstrate how you can use behavioral economics to increase things like tax compliance, how you can increase things like organ donation, right? And these are very important things. And what we're finding is, we don't necessarily need to use very expensive methods to try to do these kinds of things, but often it might just be framing the problem in a slightly different way, to present the information in a slightly different way, right? So a lot of behavioral economic work goes into understanding these kinds of framing effects. And if we understand this, then we can use this information to come up with outcomes that are beneficial to society as a whole, right? Which is, in the end, the idea of public policy. And so therefore, we're seeing a lot of ideas from behavioral economics filtering into various areas of public policy, whether it's healthcare, right? So for example, even now, right, we're in the middle of a terrible pandemic, right? I mean, it's a crisis. It's horrible. We're all going through difficult things in our lives. One of the things that's been happening though at the same time is, something like as simple as vaccine hesitancy, right? There are a lot of people out there who do believe that they should not be taking the vaccine. And this is very often the consequence of misinformation that they might have received in their WhatsApp groups and so on and so forth, right? So how do you combat these kinds of pernicious behaviors? And here again, there might be certain insights that you can get as a behavioral economist that might help you communicate a communication strategy that might help increase perhaps a little bit of vaccine uptake and things like that. Obviously, as I said before, there are a lot of other ways to get to these kinds of problems, but behavioral econ gives a very robust set of tools to deal with a lot of real problems, right? So that's a little bit about a field that I am interested in, and a field that I do think has a lot of different types of applications.
No, it's a very exciting space. Pritika, I'm going to come to you on this bit a little bit, and just going back to what IDFC does, and because Gaurav did touch on the public policy and so many other aspects which is coming to people. Where do you see in your kind of day-to-day work the kind of economics that you studied, and where does that interface with with a few other subjects?
Sure. So this is a great segue from what Gaurav was saying, and also what Sarabjit said about people's interest in policy. I studied economics, of course, and then I studied urban planning for my master's. And so I think economics provides a very, very solid foundation when you work in policy, in public policy, in ways that even programs themselves don't anticipate. So I'll give you an example. Because I had an economics degree in undergrad, I worked for a couple of years in economics consulting. I went into a planning degree because I felt it was fundamentally interdisciplinary. And I was very disappointed to find that, even one of the best planning programs only had one course in economics. And it was sort of this box that, so planning programs are usually placed in architecture schools. And there's this one economics class that everyone has to do. And everyone looks terrified and does the class and then says, okay, I got through that, and then moves on. And I think we fail to appreciate how fundamental economics is to the study of pretty much everything. So, whether it's healthcare or whether it's urban planning. So if you don't have the ability, for instance, to see cities as labor markets, or to understand what agglomeration benefits are, to understand why people cluster in cities, and these are almost intangible things to see. You don't fundamentally understand the sorts of interventions that are needed. So there are two parts to the problem. One is, what are the underlying drivers, which is what economics helps you see. And the second piece is, okay, what needs to be done? And those technical solutions lie in the realm of, say, planning or healthcare or whatever. You have to understand the forces. So let's say this is true across public policy. I think, whether it's, court judgments or it's price caps or whatever it is that we recommend in policy, there's a lack of understanding of economics that sometimes underpins these decisions. And then just two more things. During my undergrad, an economics professor of mine had us do a very interesting exercise that has really stuck with me. She said, open, any good, so The Economist or any good news source, read the stories, not in the economics and finance section, but you tell me, when you read these stories, what the economic forces at play are. And so beginning to, to see that in everything that's happening around you, I think is very important. And so I think, while we have people from a host of disciplines, we really encourage people to have a fundamental economic grounding in economics.
Economics. Okay, that's interesting. So Sarabjit, I want to really come to you on that. And you really, your research interest itself is in interdisciplinary nature of economics. So when it comes to other disciplines like social studies or history or politics, and so where do you see economics interface or converge, any of that?
Thanks, Kala. My research actually has been in public policy, where I was looking at the implementation of public policy of Manrega, which I have looked at through very mathematical and statistical methodologies. After that, I have looked at gender representation in the small and the medium, the MSME sector. I'm looking at currently migration and partition studies, and also my ongoing project is on the effect of societal violence on growth and the GDP. Now, in addition to this, as a personal interest of mine, I also research into Sikh history and culture, and I also write about the Guru Granth Sahib. And it is because of my grounding, I think, that I've been able to do this. And it's very important for me to explain to you. It's not just for me to say that economics took me or brought me here. What I wish to highlight is there are three things about economics that I can predominantly say help me to think differently. And the first one is what we call the post hoc fallacy, which is, after this, therefore because of this. It takes away that mysticism that, these things are, because they are correlated, they are causatory also. It lets you look deeper and find better answers to what is happening. The second, for example, I'll give an example to the students who are listening to me who perhaps have not, figured out what this correlation and causation is, because it's been thrown at us for the past 1 year with COVID and the numbers and why it's increasing and why, because we're a hot country. Eventually, it's all factored out. For example, if you're playing on your cell phone, if you're writing a text message on your cell phone and the phone hangs up, your first correlation will be, okay, whenever I type a text message, my phone hangs up, therefore something is wrong with the texting app or something. You may have opened about 10 apps. You may have slowed your phone down because of other reasons. So that simple thinking, I'm not saying that other disciplines don't provide it, but this is a hallmark of what I think economics tells us. The second is, what we say, well, if something is right for one, something will be right for, that same thing will be right for all, which is to say that whole is not always the sum of its parts. And this helps a lot when you think in terms of policy, that, you can't have a single policy which is tailored for all needs. So one size does not fit all. And the third thing, which I find very critical, in making criticality an important study of economics, is subjectivity, which is something that we use in politics. We are seeing right now, and we ask ourselves, why are people not being rational in what they are doing? How is it that we are letting, this kind of magnitude of destruction happen in our economy and our society? But that's subjectivity. People think differently, and you have to accommodate that thinking. And so, in addition to this, this perhaps is the easiest way I can explain, my multifaceted interest, that it doesn't restrict you to just one particular field of economics. For example, I enjoy researching on policy. I really, from Manrega, I'm now looking at the implementation of other policies. And a lot, as Gaurav said, it's got to do a lot with the behavioral response of the welfare beneficiaries to what the government is offering. But that's just one part of my interest. So it does not, my study of economics has actually broadened my field, and I look at things very differently. And I'm very thankful to the fact that I have a grounding of economics, because from here I've also gone and done a lot of research in business. I've looked at administration, how public policy is administered through the implementers, and what can be done to make them more efficient. Yeah. And so, in addition to giving you data-guided, response, and in addition to letting you identify the trends of what is happening and what the history tells you and what the future may have in store for you, economics is very broad-based, because it basically lets you have a criticality around you and in your thoughts. I hope that's a...
Absolutely. No, I think, yeah, and we've traversed, through this round, I think heard a bit about it, going through policy to, whether it's national policy, public policy, at the digital marketing front. And there's one more area I want to ask Gaurav on before we move to our next round of questions. So Gaurav, you have a very keen interest in energy and environment. And I know it's an area we haven't touched particularly now so far yet in the economic space. But how do you see economics actually interact? Because this is probably going to be a very compelling area of focus, right? For the country, for whether that's private and the public, this whole space of energy and environment, and where economics actually interfaces.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Kala, for the question. And yes, I am interested in energy and the environment. I've done a lot of research in both these areas. So to answer your question, in the end, when we are thinking about energy and the environment and how they, a lot of the discussion around energy, for example, is in the end a discussion of regulation, right? Because the fundamental environmental problem that we have is one of overexploitation, be it in different forms, and it has different consequences, right? Relating to collapsing fisheries, for example, at one level, excess air pollution in various cities at another level. So there are a whole host of energy and environment related issues, right? That's one bit. And then on the energy side, there's also a lot of interest in new modes of energy development, right? So if we're looking at renewables, there's a lot of interest in that. If we're looking at now new energy efficient modes of transportation, right? So this is a lot of the excitement around e-vehicles and so on and so forth. So these are some of the areas in which energy and environment impinges upon our daily lives. And if we think about it, all of this is all in the end driven by policy, because fundamentally there are no rights that are ad hoc or historically allocated to things like air pollution, right? Or, if a fishery is a common resource, then, it's not that I, as a fisherman A, or you as fisherman B have explicit rights to capture, to get so many tons. So without these kinds of rights, it leads to these kinds of overexploitations. And so if we want to deal with these kind of issues, then we need to look at some sort of, I guess, set of rules and regulations, whether it's formal laws or whether it's, informal arrangements within the community who are using these resources. And so therefore it becomes a question of legislation, it becomes a question of negotiation, it becomes a question of dealing with lots and lots and lots of stakeholders. And to deal with these kinds of questions, again, economics is a great field because economics looks at these kinds of questions as a core part of its discipline. So if you're doing a course in environmental economics, for example, these are the questions that you will be looking at. And you will have a theoretical basis to help you understand what is going on, what are the drivers, why are people behaving the way they do, and what are potential solutions that might be there. And then beyond that, there is also, a robust empirical framework that you can then use to see whether specific interventions that you might be interested in might work or might not work, right? And so therefore, that's why an economist has a very important part to play in these kinds of areas, just because of the nature of the problems.
Yeah.
Right. So even if you're looking at, for example, the spreading out of or building out, if you're interested in, for example, e-vehicles, right? Now, in India, at least, like in the e-vehicle space, there are lots of debates that are going on. But one debate that is going on is, whether you should set up like a massive infrastructure of charging stations, right? So therefore, I take my e-scooter to a charging station and I plug it in and I charge my car, or whether we should have battery swapping stations, right? Which means that I take my e-scooter to a battery swapping station, I give them my old battery, which is depleted, and I get in a new battery and I move on, right? So this is a technological question, but to determine what kind of system we're going to have is an economic question then, right? Because there are so many parties, right? You have different parties who think that system A is better, people who think system B is better. There are different costs associated with these kinds of infrastructures, right? So in the end, these kinds of decisions are economic decisions. And so therefore it helps to have economic analyses of these decisions, moving beyond just the pure technological aspects of it. Because we need to have sensible policies. We need to be able to understand the consequences of these kinds of actions. And this is where economics plays a part.
Absolutely. Kavita, I'm going to come to you. And I know this is going to really segue into our next round of asking. So the fact is just now that we've heard so much about how economics cuts across all that. So while it remains a basic degree, and going back, as I said, to when we studied in the 90s of economics being a singular degree, all you did was here's micro, here's macro, here's policy, 3 years of pricing and all of that. So do you think that economics can anymore at an undergraduate level be studied like that without the context of other disciplines?
So I will take it one step lower, not the undergrad level. I'll talk about the school level. I think listening to this conversation, and I'm no economist, I am a very hardcore academic person, a K-12 academic person. I would love to take Gaurav to my schools because you see, what he's talking makes so much sense. And this is what I would like to say, that no subject can be studied without economics if you really think about it. In a school context, we've all been, talking about so-called, if you've been part of the K-12 scene, we're always talking about 21st century skills, critical thinking, analytical skills. Now, how do you expect a child who is devoting 18 hours out of 24 hours concentrating on PCM to crack the JEE exam have any clue? He will be one of our pioneers who comes up with something really fantastic to create an e-vehicle, as Gaurav was talking about. But beyond that, he will have no understanding of any of the issues which he was talking about. I think it is very, very imperative. It's like, and of course, CBSE and our government has really given it a thought. The new education policy is actually focusing on kind of making an interdisciplinary approach to every subject. I look at it, and this is what I've also been working, because I've seen there's a lot of emphasis on these core subjects. Children don't even want to look at subjects like psychology and economics, because you see, these are two subjects which can blend and enhance any career you opt for, irrespective of your choice. So I think interdisciplinary is definitely the call of the day. We are already on the way to it.
Yeah. One is to look at economics becomes fundamental to all other disciplines. The other bit is also to say, even if you focus on economics, you can't really ignore so many other areas. And you did touch very nicely, Kavita, on psychology and economics. And that's pretty much the core of your business, isn't it, David? That whole combination to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, this interplay that we've been discussing, and I was listening very carefully to what Gaurav said and the other panelists have also said. I look back on my experience and the way I approach the whole thing, it becomes so obvious. For example, I would listen to the budget speech very, very carefully and look at the impact on various sectors, because that is going to have a bearing on how companies in those verticals are going to perform, from a business strategy and a marketing point of view. And also, for example, on taxation and jobs creation, because that will have a bearing on how consumers can respond, or how will they respond in future. How much disposable income will they have? Will they be able to grow, and so on and so forth? So that was on the one side of it, at a macro level. Then what Gaurav said about behavioral economics was fascinating, because although I've never looked at it like that, the way we look at it from a marketing point of view is, what are people trading off on? To be able to improve their lives, given their current level of income, or what stage of life are they in? If it's double income, no kids, there's a lot of indulgence. It's about getting a new car, it's about new clothes, it's about going out, eating out, new shoes, all that sort of thing, because they're indulging in themselves and enjoying their relationship. Then they become a young family, and suddenly the focus changes to providing for the kids, and everything changes. Then they become a mature family, and thoughts start turning towards, what happens when I have to stop working? And they've already invested in the kids' education and made sure they're on their 2 feet and all of that. So then they start thinking about not just savings, but providing for their future, and so on. And interwoven into all of that is insurance. It is, timeshares so that the kids can have holidays, all that sort of thing.
Yes.
Everything is absolutely interlinked. So, the more I listen, the more all this is becoming very, very clear.
It is, isn't it? And that's, which is why for us, most often at CREA, to explain interwoven education it's really challenging, and we kind of put an example out there saying there's no problem you can see in a single lens. So yeah, that's interesting. Thanks. I'm going to talk a little bit about given this whole complexity of where we are. So economics looks fundamental, economics looks cornerstone. It also needs to align. It's got the kind of applicability it does. I'm going to talk a little bit in terms of the future skills and where we are headed. Pritika, if I could just request a bit from you to talk about, as a think tank at IDFC, what are the kind of core skills do you think economics graduates come from? So one is, and I want you to also say how much is academic discipline, academic grounding or input important vis-a-vis what would be the kind of skills that you think students should come in to be part of the larger complex problems that you're working on in a think tank like IDFC Institute?
That's a good question, and I think my thinking on it has evolved over the years. So of course we want people to come in with strong foundations. I think strong foundations are really important because then when you ask research questions, you make sure that you're answering them in a rigorous manner. And I think that's the most important, right? What you don't want is faulty slipshod analysis. At the same time, what we say, particularly at a think tank, right? So if you're at an academic research institution, you have longer time horizons. So you can worry about, your p-value and all of these things, but you have longer timelines. But in a policy context, what the way we say is it has to be rigorous enough that we trust our analysis, but it also has to be quick enough for the timelines of a policymaker. So one is having this balance between not getting lost in an academic exercise, but saying, I know that my foundations are strong and I can ask this question rigorously, and also being willing to be quick about turning it around. That's one. The second thing that's extremely important that we don't think about enough is the ability to communicate. And so, if you think about a politician, for instance, right, and that's perhaps not the best or most inspiring example to use at the moment, their strongest skill is or should be communication. And what it means is taking something complex and then converting it into a message, right? And in an ideal world, when you've got policy ideas and you're speaking to a policymaker who's very short on time, they don't really have time to look at your 10-page, 30-page report. We have a joke that all our reports should be small enough that they can be folded and thrown in a bin, and also summarized in one page. But this ability to tell stories is very, very important. And we don't emphasize that enough in our curriculum or even how we think about our work, right? We think that because I've produced this report and I have all of these recommendations, this is all I need to do. And then the third part is, the third of the four is having a good understanding of political economy, right? So I think, and I've done this, right? Early on in my career, I've said, I studied this, I did this, and here are my recommendations. So A, I have to tell the story, otherwise no one's going to listen to me. B, I have to understand that just because I am thinking of first best solutions, it doesn't mean that that's what the policy establishment is ready for. This is an imperfect world. There are sometimes there's a policy window for sometimes the optics just don't work. And so understanding the broader context in which you are making recommendations is extremely important, right? So it's no use saying, I have these amazing recommendations, no one's listening to me. You have to be aware of the political economy. Which takes me to two other things that I've realized are incredibly important. So the first is curiosity. And so everything we've spoken about today, about things being interdisciplinary, really comes from a certain inherent curiosity. If you believe that I'm going to study this one discipline and everything that I recommend is going to come from this one discipline, that's not likely the case, right? So one is a natural curiosity about the world. And one of the best books that I read last year was a book called Range, that talks about how by David Epstein, I think, the most fundamental and important breakthroughs of our time were actually made not by experts in one field, but people who had expertise across different fields, because you really begin to see things at the intersection of different fields. And then the last thing that we look for is a willingness to get things done, right? And this is not just true of think tanks. I think it's just true general career advice. If you say, this is my job description and I'm going to stick to it, or this is what I did and I expect a response, that doesn't really work. I think just having the capacity to say, I will do what it takes to make this happen, and to start from, to some extent, the outcome you want to see and work backwards is just a really important skill that increasingly, that attitude is something that we screen for. So those are my 5.
Thank you. That's quite interesting, and we are excited. Thank you for offering an internship to Kriyas. I'm really excited to see how our students are equipped enough to be in an institute like IDFC, the think tank. And Kavita, if I could just come to you a little bit about this bit. So do you see some of the core skills, now hearing what you've heard around that, do you think some of these core skills are happening at the school level? And given it's not going to be a very easy, it's going to be a very competitive environment, what do you think should be the kind of skills we need to insinuate right at the school level or an undergraduate level for students to take forward as purely as an educationist?
So I think I would say our think tanks in India are really working on it. And they have put these things into place, as Pritika very rightly said, and I really strongly believe communication is one future skill that we really need to work on. More so because India is a very multilingual place. And unfortunately, our children are not strong in any language. I'm talking about the majority. I'm not talking about the elite 5%, 10%. I'm talking about the general masses. And what happens, uh, I think what we have seen is that it is critically important to be able to communicate whatever you want to say as briefly and as precisely as possible. Another thing, I think a skill which a future skill which can be associated with the learning of economics is the art of diplomacy. I think this is really important because, again, I'm only talking from the perspective of the teenagers who are in the schools, not even the undergrads. Children today are, I think, leading a very I don't have the right word, a very contented life, a life where they have to just say it and they get it. So something like negotiating, something like kind of accepting, kind of putting their point across without a disagreement is not really a very inborn skill. We need to develop it in them. And another skill I think very important is the IT skill. So I think our education policy, the new policy has really focused on all these skills, trying to bring in. And I think the study of economics really brings these skills right to the forefront. So at school level, a lot of work is happening. Again, I would say at the policy level, we still need to see its implementation.
Fair enough. David, I'm going to touch on this very exciting space called consumer insights. Now, this is becoming so big, and I know that it's not just as digital marketing agencies, very large brands have, and especially with lots more that's happening. The e-commerce space, for instance, is being led by this whole space of consumer insights, and definitely it's going to become a space where a number of economics, if you like, graduates will want to look at opportunities. So what kind of skills do you think would actually do you see as quite important for somebody who's aiming for these areas? And I know there's a separate argument in the sense, how much can you train in college? You can't, but we'll take that response from you as well. But just your understanding of what kind of skills do you see young graduates who want to work in this whole exciting space of consumer insights, which probably combines economics and psychology?
That's a great question, Kala. Let me approach it at a very broad level, coming off what Pritika said in terms of knowledge cutting across various disciplines and being able to apply that in an economic sense being more and more important. You know, if I look at it from a marketing point of view, David Ogilvy said to be a marketer or an advertiser, you have to have a liberal arts education. The more liberal, the better. Meaning, you have to have that curious mind and develop your understanding of various things, not just what you're doing. And a good example of a man who did that and succeeded beyond anybody's imagination was Steve Jobs. He was a college dropout, but he was able to disrupt markets because of his deep understanding of various things, from design to typography to, you know, uh, uh, the way human beings interact with devices and so on and so forth, all of which he taught himself. So I think one big lesson here to a student is, it is not your subject alone that is going to help you for the rest of your life. It is your ability to be curious and to engage with various disciplines and absorb them to be able to use them well. Now, I will add just two more aspects to that before I come to digital marketing. I think in addition to what Kavita said about focus on what students in school should be learning, I would add a sense of social responsibility. about compassion and caring for others.
I
What's
missed out
happening-
the socio-emotional learning. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think what is missing today is this aspect of, at the school level, being concerned about others. It's all about them and what they want and how they want to do it. And it's kind of resulting in competition, which is destructive, because it's all about that percentage, and they view others in the exam room as enemies because you're all competing for those marks. I think that has to change fundamentally. Fortunately, if you look at the millennials, once they became young adults, they seem to have learned that on their own about being responsible for others as well. If you look at many of the people who are cooking for the COVID affected today and sending them food, it is young adults. And that's wonderful to see. So that's one aspect. The other is for them to be, I suppose it's interrelated, to grow in terms of emotional intelligence. Because communications is not about words alone. It's about understanding where the audience is and being able to shape what you're saying to respond to them. And many of the children today are not at all emotionally intelligent because they're so wrapped up in themselves. When they are speaking to somebody, they are talking at them without any listening. So there are no conversations happening. Instead, it's becoming antagonistic. We've done enough interviews where we see this happening, right? When kids come into a group discussion, the belief is, I have to stand out by shouting down everybody else. That's not a discussion, and somebody who's doing that, we will definitely not hire. So these are the kind of things we need to get more and more conscious of, even at a school level, because all of these impact one's ability to be a digital marketer. Digital marketing involves everything that I talked about, certainly emotional intelligence, certainly empathy, certainly being able to look at it from somebody else's point of view. So much so, a lot of what we do today is in the realms of even understanding broad trends in society, because when we are putting out messages there, they're not messages. We are starting conversations. They're not messages as in how brands communicate on television or print, where you have a canned message with one promise that you're trying to hammer home into somebody's mind. It doesn't work like that on social media. Social media is about developing content that rewards the person who's viewing it. And that reward is not necessarily to do with the brand. It could be emotion. It could be a challenge. It could be a new perspective, new information. It could be humor. It could be provocation. It can be many things. But it starts a conversation that leads to a positive outcome and a relationship with the brand and identifying with the brand, and goes through a process where they ultimately believe that that's the brand for them. So digital marketing has to kind of weave in all of these things to be able to be effective. And unless we get enough young adults coming out of colleges who have all these abilities, it's not going to happen. See, about 3 years ago, we would have to interview 30 people to be able to find one person who kind of was employable. Today, it's 40, 45. It's a serious issue.
Oh yeah, you highlight something very important. And this whole sense of impact and purpose, and it's something that's very close to our heart at Career, and at least at the Career Services Office, that at the start of this entire day, I did say that what we do at the end of first year is for all our students to work in a social impact project. We don't insist on any corporate project. We tell them, if you want to do that, you do it on your own. But what we do is, whether that is designing the G Suite for Teach for India, whether that's creating the manuals for I Teach schools, or whether that's doing the survey forms for Ummeed, these are the kind of tasks that our students have done. And we feel that that sense of purpose and impact is so important, that you start to see your basic skills applied to that magnitude, that you can see that the butterfly effect, if they get to understand that very earlier on. And we've often seen that some students are very proud about it. They continue to want to do it in some sort of manner. And if we made that happen, we'll be very excited as a community as well. I want to now direct to the couple of academics here, and this is our last round. We'll just close this and take a couple of questions. But really the future of the study itself, Sarajit, if I could just get your comments a little bit in terms of how do you think the future is going to evolve in the terms of how we are teaching economics? Do you want to kind of maybe throw the light a bit about how have we addressed it at Kriya maybe as well in that sense?
Thank you, Kala. It's been kind of very exciting for me to listen to everybody. And I'm moving to a different camera because that other one is not working. You know, what my feeling and my take on this is that the future is not just uncertain, it is now disruptive. We have, what was uncertain was maybe 2 years ago. We are now in a place where we cannot predict what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen the next trimester, what's going to happen the next year, because we kind of eroded that bridge that we could have walked on. So we really have to think differently. I'll divide this question into 3 parts. One is what needs to be done. 2, what we are doing at Kriya. And 3, what is needed for the world after they leave Kriya. So, before I started to teach at Kriya, I was at a business school. You know that. And before I was doing many things because, as David said, children and they are perhaps out of focus, and that is actually a truism because they actually are. I taught at a high school for a few years, and what I found was that it is a sense of entitlement. They think they deserve it because they deserve it, and you have to cater to that. And unfortunately our examination system actually perpetuates it because the board exams that we write, they are bullet point driven. You write these 6 points, you get the marks. You don't write this, you will get -1. And the kind of inequality that exists in the system today, pan-India, students who have access to tuitions and better notes tend to do better than students maybe in the, perhaps areas where they don't have access to academic support and they're kind of left out in the outlier, negative outlier bunch. Now, when they come to a school like Kriya, it's all right to say that, we have to teach students differently. For example, I teach macroeconomics, what I call aggregate economic analysis. And for me to do that and to say that, all right, I'm going to teach you differently, I'm going to give you case studies and it is to assume that they know the base. And the base is missing. So I have to set the base and then slowly take them and make them, the world ready. For example, for me to say, let's talk about what's happening in the GDP today. Let's talk about what's happening in the economy, and therefore, as a result, what's happening to the GDP and the growth rate. I have to make sure that they understand what the actual, mechanism is, that goes into calculating the GDP, not just what the school taught them. And so there is my disconnect. And there is what Kriya does in terms of what Kritika said, communication. There's a very strong communication base that we have. And then when they come to the classroom, we prepare the base with theory. We prepare the base with, to make them, the idea is to make them ready to understand the add-ons. And once they get the add-ons, then we go and address the other issues of what to do to make them future ready. Because as I said at the beginning, this disruption will require a paradigm shift now. For example, if somebody asks me what I should do, a student comes to me, I will no longer tell them that just please do economics. My entire, focus now as a parent and as a teacher and as a guide and as a mentor is to say, please layer your skills. And Kriya does that. For example, we have data, we have computers, we have mathematics, we have writing skills, we have historicity of the subject. So all these 5 pillars actually help to make a better all-rounded, not a student or a person, but a person who's able to imbibe. Going out into the market, as I think Kavita also said, that you just can't stand alone and say, well, this is me, accept me for what I am. You have to be willing to adjust. You have to be willing to bend a bit. And that, that feeling of gratitude, that feeling of being an empty vessel that doesn't mind being filled up, that sense of empathy that others spoke about, that is a very important marker, I think, of what Kriya is trying to do. And in these are very uncertain times, so it will take a much longer process than what we are doing right now to make it successful. But our intent is that. If you ask me what am I teaching differently, actually right now, and maybe you can see me, see the board behind me, I am actually doing a whiteboard class. No presentations, no PPTs. In fact, I write down hand notes in my own handwriting and I send it to them. And I take a PDF and I take a photograph and I make a PDF and I send it to them and I tell them, this is what I want you to know. There should be no gap in what I say and what you hear. And so I don't want any assumptions creeping in that I may have said this. What I am saying, in case there is some clutter or there is some out of focus, this is what you need to do. And as far as the future skills are concerned, I mean, I really don't have to add anything to what Kritika and Kavita said. They are very comprehensive in what is required. But what I would like to just add my 2 bits over here is that, as I think David started this argument by saying that the focus has been on growth. And we have only looked at growth and we have rewarded growth, not just of the people, but also of countries, of economies, of societies. And it has brought us to this brink. And we really are at a precipice right now. We could just topple over. And so the focus cannot just be, okay, let's talk about other things. The focus has to be on deep growth. The focus has to be on cooperation. The competitiveness that has guided us, for the past 50 to 70 years it's fine. I'm not saying being competitive is wrong but to that we have to add a layer of, of being cooperative. And to me, the biggest challenge that the world faces today is, in addition to climate change and everything else, is actually the widening inequalities of income and wealth. And we have to address that. We have to make sure that the students whom we are, whom we are mentoring and whom we are creating for the next world, understand that this accent on being just me and only me, that selfish nature of consumption has to become perhaps a more distributive nature of consumption. That's what I feel. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarabjit. Thank you so much. So Gaurav, if I could just get any closure comments, and I know there's quite a bit waiting there in terms of asking about game theory and those kind of areas. So do you want to just maybe quickly close in, because you of course come in new, but how do you see the discipline change the way it's being taught now?
Right, great. Yes, I'll be extremely brief. So how has the teaching of econ changed over the last decade or so? I guess one point is it's become a lot more quantitative focused, right? So a few years ago, definitely when I was, in my undergrad, for example, a lot of econ learning would be just focusing on the models, the basic, models, demand and supply curves, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, it's very important. I mean, and econ teachers, econ professors also realize that it's very important for students to understand how to work with data, because that is essential going forward. And so therefore, our focus is now not only on the theory, but also on the application of these theories to real world data sets, how to work with them. A lot of, so basically elements of data science, so to speak, creep in as well. That's one. Two is related to this. Also, the curriculum itself is now focused a lot more on, it's more real world focused. Right, so a lot of so there'll be a lot of looking at concrete examples to illustrate various theories, right? And so this is something that I believe is a good thing, because it also contextualizes the subject. You understand it not only as a set of abstract theories, but you also understand how it can affect day-to-day living, how it can affect big policies, big decisions in our lives, right? And finally, as far as the pedagogical styles themselves go, and this is not really only true for economics, but this is true across the board, I would say. I guess the old school pedagogical style is a very passive pedagogical style, right? I mean, the instructor speaks, the student sits, and all this information washes over him or her, and hopefully they learn a little bit. But nowadays, we do realize, as everyone was saying, right? I mean, how important things like communication are, how important things like critical thinking are. And so therefore, the nature of assignments, the nature of interactions in the class have also changed to that extent. So for example, you might be asked to do a little bit more critical writing. Your problem sets might be a bit more, getting to the nitty-gritty of the theories themselves. I'm teaching a behavioral econ class this trimester, so one thing that I thought was very important was to let students come up with their own research proposals, perhaps, right? So read a bunch of papers in behavioral economics. There are a lot of topics. You'll find one topic that you like, work together with one person or another person or something like that. Come up with your own research proposal, right? So go through that entire process. You're not going to come up with. It's not going to be perfect the first time, right? Because we all learn. But by going through this process, you learn a lot about the field itself. You learn a lot about how to structure thoughts. You learn a lot about a little bit about presentation itself, right? How to time yourself, how to get your comments across. So I see, these are various things that are changing, and I think they're changing for the good. So that's my 2 benefits. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I guess that kind of different approach in terms of not studying a graph and writing it out, but actually seeing it apply is great. I'm going to take some audience questions now, and this question is interesting about health economics. I'll open it up to the floor and who wants to comment. Pritika, is that something that you would like to talk about in terms of what's really happening in health economics, and is that going to be an interesting space to focus on?
Thanks, Kala. So I don't know that I know enough to speak about health economics as a whole, but I think there's no question that both healthcare and public health are going to become huge issues going forward. And both there's a funding and an economics aspect to both. And one is really prevention and cure. So just one thing that I'd highlight is we've done a lot of focus on healthcare. What happens after you get sick? And clearly we've not done enough. I mean, we're seeing this every day. But the other thing is public health. And that lies in the realm of, everything from water to sanitation to adequate housing, air pollution and things like that. And so I'd say that, yes, health economics will become very important, but, both on the public health and the healthcare side.
Anybody wants to add anything to that, or? Okay, if not, we could pass on. So Gaurav, this has been quite the question about your the focus. Everybody's talked a lot on the data, so there is definitely a question. Does that mean I can't do economics if I don't have a strong grounding in mathematics? Does it mean that a career in economics should mean I should be good in mathematics and statistics? This comes from Shirish.
Right. Okay. So unfortunately, I would say that just the way that the field is evolving, right? I mean, now as an economist, I mean, it's not just being in economics, right? It's also like a whole bunch of other fields where, data has just become part of our life. So we need to be able to somehow look for patterns in the data. And, maybe in a few years, there will be very sophisticated tools that we can use without necessarily understanding a little bit about what's going on, under the bonnet, so to speak, that will still help us understand patterns in the data and make inferences. But I don't think we're quite there yet. So at least as of now, if you are looking to understand patterns in the data, it is helpful to have some sort of understanding of maths and statistics. That said, I do believe that, and I believe this very strongly, because I mean, that these are things that can be learned, right? We're not talking about necessarily very high levels of mathematical or statistical sophistication, but even if you're basically able to understand how to plot a bar chart, what means are, what variances are, basic statistical concepts. If basic ideas of what is a statistically significant result versus what is not, these kinds of things, they would really help you not only in a career in economics, but in a lot of other careers as well as you can find. Right? And this becomes important, right? Because unless you have this little bit of information, then the numbers, you can't really use the numbers to say that A is better than B or B is better than A. right? So, and unfortunately, that's just a little bit of just the way the world is now, right? I mean, we are in a big data world, right? As everyone keeps saying, which means that we need to be able to engage with data to some extent. And this is true for econ, and it's true for a lot of other fields. So I will say that if you're interested in so again, now we're talking about at the undergrad level, right? So I will say that, if you are absolutely set against not doing math and stats and want to do a degree in economics, I do believe that your training would be a bit incomplete. But that is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you might still get the basic concepts and the ideas. And, when you do go for further studies, perhaps you will find areas, or when you do look for jobs, you will find areas where it is not needed for you to use math. I mean, maybe I can toss this over to David as well, right? I mean, in the end, in an area like digital marketing, for example, what would you say? I mean, is it something that, is a bit of statistical or math knowledge needed, or not really?
I think analytics is a fundamental part of digital marketing. And whoever asked the question, I'd just like to say that analysis of the numbers or of economics and the way it works is not quite mathematics, because these numbers tell you a story. And if you approach it like that, in terms of understanding what it is trying to tell you, it's actually fascinating. It's not pure math. You're trying to detect patterns in the numbers. You're trying to detect preferences that are coming up. You're trying to detect points at which significant decisions are made and things like that. So it's actually a very, very interesting thing and not mathematics. That's how I go at it.
Yeah, fair enough. And
Kala,
to just
yes, may I add? Yes, may I add what I want to say is that there is no fear of math. Actually, there should not be any fear of math. And what data allows you is actually to make your point very clearly, and it's easier to convince people of what you are trying to tell them. So there is a little lesser effort in trying to push the policy, or perhaps a business policy or a public policy. And from where I am working on not mathematics, but I'm working on economics of a lot of things. For example, my current project that I'm looking at is on the partition and the movement of refugees from Pakistan to India in 1947, and how it affected the small-scale businesses and what they brought with them. And what I'm finding very intriguing, other than the micro-histories of partition, is also the fact that the population movement followed a pattern. And that itself is data, but it's not scary data. You can just look at the number of people who came, the kind of the kind of skills they had. So what I found, for example, is that the people who came from Pakistan, certain areas, Lahore, Karachi, etc., were better educated, and they were absorbed in the government services. The ones who came from the Western Pakistan, Western Punjab side, were not so well educated, and they needed to start their own businesses. Now, this is data, but it is not scary mathematical modeling data. So it's not a fear of mathematics. And if you have that, you can safely take it out, because in any field that you go into, whether it's economics or even, let's assume you go for BCom honors or something very market ready as economics, you will find that you need to do math. So it's just a good fear to get over.
Yes, and at CREA, I mean, clearly, Sarabjit, what we do at the first year is, irrespective of what you come to study, everybody gets a grounding in data and mathematical reasoning. So it doesn't matter what you come to study, whether it's literature or psychology, you would all have to go through it. And even if you're going to major in psychology, there's going to be a certain requirement. So that's something we recognize is a very core skill, and that's embedded into your first year. So that fear of numbers and data is actually taken out of many of the students, and then they decide to progress or not. I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes definitely talking on this compelling repeated question of the economics psychology combination. And Gaurav, I'm going to first defer to you to two questions. One is, simply in layman terms, can you explain what game theory is? I know you've kind of spoken about it quite a bit, but just simply, where does it play? And how do you see students probably at CREA getting an opportunity to study both economics and psychology, for instance, at CREA, or how do those both come together?
All right, so I'll first start by the game theory question. And here, some of the other economists, please feel free to correct me. But basically, I mean, game theory is all about strategic interaction. So what this means is that, if we're looking at two people and we're trying to figure out how they're going to decide, their person A, I can do something, but my counterparty can react in a certain other way, right? And as a consequence of this kind of interplay between our decisions, there's going to be some final outcome which might be beneficial to both of us, which might be beneficial to one of us, or so on, right? There are various permutations and combinations. And so what game theory does is it provides a formal apparatus, a formal way of thinking about how people behave when they are in these kinds of strategic situations, right? Broadly speaking, they might choose to compete, or they might choose to collaborate, right? And so therefore, so these are two broad ideas, and given these various sets of, these various basic ideas, we're going to have different outcomes, and game theory helps us to formalize that. So that is game theory, strategic interaction, right? With a formal mathematical model in the background. So the second question is this question of economics and psychology. And yes, you're absolutely right? I mean, there does seem to be a lot of interest at the intersection of economics and psychology. And if we think about what is at the intersection of economics and psychology, in the end, that's where behavioral economics sits. It sits at the intersection of economics and psychology. Why is this? Because as I was mentioning earlier, behavioral economics, it deviates from economics under the assumption that we are no longer human computers, right? We're no longer purely rational beings. So then the next question is, if we are not human computers, then what are we? And so a lot of the insights on what we are now coming in from psychology, right? And this has been happening since the 60s onwards. So, because a lot of, and within psychology also there are obviously various branches of psychology, but the specific branch of psychology that has a lot of interplay with behavioral economics is cognitive psychology, which is about decision making, right? How do people make decisions? Often you're looking at how do they make decisions under situations of risk and uncertainty? How do they make decisions when they are impacted by social norms, right? I mean, I'm in a social context, right? I mean, my family says there are certain ways I need to do things. My peer group says there are certain ways I need to do things. How do I respond to that, right? So that, and a lot of this work is exactly, I mean, a lot of some of this work has been done in the area of cognitive psychology. It provides insights on how people behave, and that is kind of spilling over into the formal economic apparatus. And so that's where behavioral economics comes in, where a lot of work is about extending the ideas of economics by taking insights from psychology. And as to the, so that's where the field itself is, why it exists, and as to the opportunities you have, this intersection between econ and psych, I've already spoken about that at length, so I won't get into that again right now in the interest of time.
Thank you. Pratika, just a quick one for you. This comes from Meghnan Dasgupta. He asks, what kind of opportunities would be there in the government sector for economics graduates?
Sure. So another very encouraging trend that I've seen in the last 8 to 10 years is, increasing. It used to be very hard to get stints in government, especially as someone who wasn't looking for a long-term career. Over the years, everything from the Ministry of Finance to other government departments have started. So state governments have started fellows programs. So you can do everything from working in the Chief Secretary's office down to working in the field. And then at the central government level, the Ministry of Finance, a couple of other departments have started, they've got different fellowships. I know the MOHUA, the Urban Development Department has a fellows program. So there's a lot of these programs depending on the sector of interest. And I think it's an incredibly important experience because it gives you a sense of sympathy of what it is to work inside government and what the constraints are. So I've kept it brief in the interest of time, but happy to elaborate further.
Thank you. Kavita, I'm going to ask this question that's purely wearing your hat as an educationist, and this really is coming from Vrishti, and I want to expand thing. Where do you see the future for, is this whole multidisciplinarity, do you see that as the future at all? And do you see that coming into, and are we seeing singular disciplinarity of the past? Your responses?
So I have been reading some of the questions where children have been, I think there are students who are asking where, whether you can take psychology. Let me begin with that this issue has been addressed by the most popular board in our country, that's CBSE. It has given the children freedom to opt for any combination of subjects. No more does it say that a pure science subjects can only be taken under the science stream. You can even pick bio and not take chemistry. You can take bio and you can take psychology and you can take nutrition. I mean, the options that are available to combine subjects are plenty. The challenge is not from the policy part of it. I'll use a word which is so common. The problem is not from what the government has initiated. The problem lies with the implementation. I think we are kind of very slow with that, and schools are still very limited because of their resources, because of the lack of good teachers, lack of knowledge, I would say, on part of parents and school management to how to blend these subjects to take it forward. But definitely that is the future. Singularity of a subject is definitely not the future. And we see, Gaurav very simply and appropriately explained, economics and psychology is becoming a popular choice, but it is still not popular enough, I would say. We really need to push the case much more, and we need to change. We are working a lot in this school level. I've been hearing Sarabjit voice the challenges that she's facing with the undergrads. I feel the change has to begin at the school level. The fear of maths comes from what the students have been through as their experience in school studying maths. What is needed is not so much as maths as the logical and analytical abilities. However, at the school level, we are not really connecting these abilities to the teaching and studying of science, of maths and economics. So I think the focus of the school, of the education department, which is looking into school education, has to be brought onto these things. And we need to work more on a very focused, the new education policy is talking of very good things, but I think before we can think of implementing even one thing, we need a lot of education of teachers, the school managements, as well as the parents. Most of the times, parents don't know that these kind of options can lead to such a fruitful occupation. They just don't know even if you become a doctor, if you do not know how to really utilize your degree, how to become an independent income earner, set up your own practice, I think economics is a very important subject where it is going to be blended with every stream in the years to come.
Thank you, Kavita. That beautifully summarized that. So, so we really have heard that, right? So it's really all encompassing, and we've heard about economics, whether that's in the world of finance, it's government, it's policy, health, education management, whether you're an entrepreneur, there's no space which doesn't take the elements of what economics offers, not the discipline itself, but the ability and the skills that the discipline actually delivers, which is a fair level of analysis and approaching problems and having a quantitative outlook to some of this. So thank you so much, panelists. I know there's other generic questions about generally job opportunities and so many others. I'm around here. I'm happy to wait and answer a couple of those angles as far as those specifics are concerned. But to our panel here, Pritika, David, Gaurav, Sarabjit, Kavita, thank you so much for sparing a Saturday afternoon. I know there's hundreds of parents and children always confused and always asking questions, and there's a little bit that we can do to answer some of these questions and help them navigate, if you can, a little bit through this very competitive, confusing future. So take care, everyone. Stay safe.
If I may just jump in, Kala, sorry.
Yes,
this is a question that we have got quite a bit, and because you're all here, I can't think of anyone else to ask this to. What are some of the books or online courses that you'd recommend for economics aspirants? If you would recommend one book that serious aspirant should read, or a course that they could do?
So I have a book that I had kept in mind. I thought I will, direct a few students to it. Yanis Varoufakis, I might have got the pronunciation wrong, has written a very lovely book called Talking to My Daughter About Economics. And I would recommend a lot of students to read that, because it kind of demystifies. And going forward, there's also very good, work on degrowth by Kate Raworth, who talks about the donut economy. So these are good books good papers to look at.
Great. I mean, if you could just type it in chat,
Sure,
I'm sure
I would do that.
would really appreciate
I would
that.
do that right away.
Any other comments? Yeah, Pritika.
So I mentioned this book earlier, but Range by David, I think it's by David Epstein, was fascinating. And I think it summarizes well what we talked about just, dabbling in different things. The other thing, and I don't have a specific book in mind, but I think when you study economics, it's really important also to read history, because I think we always look at things in this point in time. So even if you look at something like antitrust regulation, right, we do have monopolies in India today. But if you look back at the US 100 years ago, they did have monopolies. The emergence of antitrust regulation was a response to monopolies. And you start to situate everything that you read and see in the context of history. So that's my suggestion.
I would add the economics of permanence to that, because it's the interplay of the environment along with good economic policy.
The economics of permanence. All right. Okay.
J.C. Kumarappa.
Yeah, and to those who are interested in behavioral economics, there are a few books that are out there in the market and that are quite popular. So there is Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman and Tversky, both of whom are Nobel Prize winners. There is a book on, it's just called Nudge. It's by Thaler and Sunstein, Thaler again being a Nobel Prize winner. And then another book that would be an interesting read would be by R. Ely. So that's Predictably Irrational. So, those interested in behavioral econ at the intersection of econ and psychology, these are great introductions.
Awesome. If you could all, because these are not very easy to remember, if you could just type them into the chat box, that'd be of huge help. Yes, Sarabji.
Bhakti, I would also like to just add one more thing. Earlier on when we were doing our undergrad in economics, we had very limited options. We could go to Delhi School of Economics or to JNU, or take our bags and fly off to the West. For graduate studies now, I find India is offering a few really good schools. One is in policy specifically, because post-graduation in economics, standalone, there are, Delhi School and there is Math, Xavier's and all that places. But right now I find there are a couple of schools. One that I have been looking at very closely is this place called the Kautilya School of Public Policy also. So, going forward from here, there are places that you can think of to do your master's in public policy if that was indeed an option for some.
Thanks, Sarabji. Thanks. All right. Thank you all panelists. I know it's lunchtime and it's been a long morning for everyone, especially Kala. So Kala, I think it's time for a break for you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.